can you guys just explain doomer optimism?
Please.
Okay, so Jason and I met on Twitter. Basically, I think shared a lot of perspectives about the state of the world, but then both experimenting with what to do as a result of the state of the world, I think. And our what to do is pretty overlapping, but that doesn't mean that's the only what to do. So anyways, we're going back and forth about energy systems and food and the environment, and et cetera, et cetera. And I think that both of us are a little bit critical of the whole idea of like just being stuck in doom, being stuck in like the doomer mindset, meaning it's like, it's sad, it's depressing, there's like so many crises happening. And so the idea being like, let's move towards something positive. And so anyways, we're going back and forth about this. And I think Jason said something along the lines of I'm a doomer, but that doesn't mean that I'm not optimistic still. And there's not something to move optimistic toward. And then like in the just riffing and having fun, I said like doomer optimists unite. And then somebody invited us on a podcast, the Noetic Nomads, that said doomer optimists unite, and we just like kind of defined the term as we went along, and it seemed to have resonated with people. I don't know if you want to go a little deeper about like what doomer optimism has sort of come to mean.
Well, you know, it was just a playful term that, you know, Ashley coined, and then we used it as kind of a title for a podcast, and we just kept like kind of using it, and then people kind of picked up on it, and I think it has a broader appeal than just kind of our narrow set of interests, right? So like, for example, Peter Limberg, he told me that like, you know, I really like this term kind of in a very broad sense, in a way of like just kind of a sensibility, you know, and to me it's kind of a sensibility of like, it's almost like a spiritual journey that you go on, where like, or you know, one analogy is like acceptance of dying, right? Like you go through this page, it's like, oh my God, like I'm gonna die, and you might have some kind of existential crisis, but then it's like you kind of come to terms with that, and then life seems more vivid all of a sudden, and you know, and you really start to appreciate, you know, the moment, and you know, just the act of being itself, right? And it's kind of impermanence. And I think that's, to me, it's like that's kind of the general template. It's I would say it's almost a very Christian template of like, you know, Christ died on the cross, you know, and then on the third day resurrected, right? And so it's kind of, you know, so it's not a new template, but I think it's like acknowledging the state of the world, and that it's, you know, we don't think it's going to continue, you know, along the same trajectory. And, you know, we might be headed towards some really challenging times, but, you know, what a time to be alive, right? Like, what a time to be in this transition. And we don't know what's going to happen to any of us. You know, at the end of the day, we're all going to die anyway. So, heck yeah, let's ride this roller coaster and see where it goes. So
I would just add though, like, I don't even think it's necessarily Christian. I think like most religions have some way of like dealing with the fact that like death is inevitable.
No, in Buddhism, it's like, you know, one of the first noble truths is that like everything is suffering.
Right.
So that's it's a similar.
I mean, I think
pattern.
There's so many different ways in which there's this like juxtaposition that humans face, like challenges, suffering, death, collapse, whatever crisis, even if it's just like entropy. Personal crisis, entropy, and then what do you do in response to that? Like, what do you move toward? And in like different religions, you have different things that are sort of held up as like, for example, in Christianity, you have this, in Catholicism, you have the sacraments, you have like baptism and marriage and all of these different things that help move you towards something positive in life. I think that there's that in almost every ideology, except for maybe nihilism,
right?
Which I guess we're just like anti-nihilist. I don't know. I haven't ever said that before, but it's
but it's like we're anti-nihilist but we like. We understand.
I understand nihilism.
I've
been there.
That point of view. Yeah, well, it's like you've been through this kind of, you know, dark night of the soul, and then what's after that?
Right.
to me is what doomer optimism is.
How can someone be a doomer optimist? Like I'm assuming there's a large range.
So we've made very explicit, like, we don't want to gatekeep the term. We don't want to have a specific definition. Like, people can do with it whatever they want, right? Like, we try not to be too attached to it. Like, we don't want to become this ideology or a religion, right? It's just kind of a sensibility that people have resonated with, and it's nice. It's kind of a nice framing device for, how to just approach, how to approach life. But people can do with it whatever they want. People can trash it. It just doesn't matter. It's just a term.
This is why Jason's such a great partner in this, like, because he's just like takes a very zen perspective towards these things. Like, it's really helpful to me to, like, not become attached to any specific ideas about control over, like, something. But to me, the whole idea is to, like, provide people with a template or something. I don't know, something that's inspiring to them. Despite the chaos, because I think, like, basically a lot of people are just going through chaos right now and just, like, trying to understand it and then trying to, like, get a sense of what to even move toward. And and I think probably in a lot of collapses of empires in the past, there's been and I don't even it's not, like, necessarily predicated on collapse. It's just, like, one of those things where if institutions fail to meet needs, then you need to go elsewhere, and people are very confused about what elsewhere is and what's some positive, like, thing to move toward. And to me, I, like, would love to make a big tent of people. I'm just super inspired by people. There's so many people doing amazing things. Like, there's a guy outside of Portland who has a water treatment plant that uses only natural methods and a wetland to treat water. I feel so dorky talking about that, but, like, how cool is that? That's amazing. And this guy should, like, talk to other people and say, like, this is how we treat water, and it's cyclical, and the wetland is one of the top birding sites in the state now. Wow. And it's just cleaning.
It's just somebody taking initiative.
It's cleaning water. It's cleaning, like, waste. And so that's amazing. I think, like, new educational models are amazing. Like, new models for the family, or not necessarily new plus old. This is another thing that seems to keep coming up, is, like, traditional versus modern. Some mix.
Bringing the best of the past into the future, right? So it's not like, there's a lot of people, like, this meme of return has been around, and I definitely I can vibe with that, but I don't think we can ever return. Like, that's just not how the universe works. It's always moving forward. But like what can we, like, what wisdom, from every period of time, from hunter-gatherers all the way up to modernity, and technology, like, what can we bring into the future to create something new, but is Lindy, so to speak, is more Lindy. What timeless elements can we bring into the new?
Let's break apart both words, and so let's keep on the doomer. So let's talk about doomer. Like, what is going on? Anthropocene, climate degradation, ecosystem collapse, species extinction. Like, let's just talk about all the doom that is happening, and then we'll go into the optimists in a second.
Well, people come at it from a lot of different angles.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
So, like,
there's so many pick your doom. I mean,
pick your doom game, right? So there's the environmental side, which you mentioned. There's a whole set of, like, peak oil doomers, which basically are saying that, we're running out of fossil fuels. Our civilization was built around fossil fuels. It's going to get more expensive to extract, and there's going to be what's called catabolic collapse, which John Michael Greer termed. So and then what implications will that have for everything, right? There's the doom in terms of, like, political institutions, right? Like, I think a lot of people see, like, the decay of democracy, or kind of, just institutions themselves are rotting from the inside out. So I think that's a big theme.
Right, and then there's just, like, cultural demise. Yeah. I don't know, like cultural.
Like Wendell Berry-ish, kind of, like.
Right, where, like, just the culture of landedness or place or connection to community.
Yeah. Kind of just cultural vacuity, like, loss.
Right, right. I mean, I honestly think the one thing we can mostly all get behind is some doom.
Yeah.
Like, something is doomed, and I can usually agree with somebody. even if they're like, I blame it on the government or I
Right.
blame it on corporations, I'm just
Right.
kind of like, yes.
Yeah.
You
And
know,
a lot of people are, I think there's some kind of like horseshoe theory thing where like people on the left and the right are starting, like people on the right are starting to say like, hey, corporations are starting to appropriate, are starting to take over the government.
Right.
And, enact all these policies that,
Right.
that we don't like. So
Right.
like all of a sudden the right is turning against corporations, which is fascinating because I grew up around, Bush era when that was definitely not the vibe.
right. But
Yeah.
when I say like government and corporations are going together, I'm just like, oh yeah.
Yeah.
It's just like, yes, the answer is yes.
So
and
there's a scale doomers. Like I think Joe Norman, you can say is like, we
anti-globalist, yeah.
anti-globalist, where it's like everything's become overscaled,
Right.
including kind of our global economic system,
Right.
and it's fragile, and there's just too many choke points, and
I mean,
something is going to throw a wrench in the gears, and so there's
right,
that
the
kind of doomer.
economic doomers, like
Yeah.
literally, like our economic system is sort of a house of cards.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think a lot of people who were around in 2008-9 are like, I mean, the inflation people are right.
Yeah.
Also,
Right.
you know what I
right,
mean? Like
yeah,
basically everybody's right.
Mhm.
And my perspective on this is just like, any one of these things could catastrophically fail and be very bad.
Yeah.
So how to build in like redundancies or like risk mitigation.
Yeah, I'm really interested in almost existential risks of like solar flares or like an asteroid. Those
Yeah,
kind of
we
things.
haven't even talked about the singularity yet.
We're still going through the initial things of doom.
Yeah.
Right.
Onto the higher stages of doom.
Right. I mean, I don't know. Like, I mean, what else? Like, what are the?
I wake up every morning and I have I'm getting old now apparently, so I have like a new ache in my body. So like I feel like a sense of
You have
personal
personal doom. Yeah.
That's-
I mean, I think personal doom is a real thing too.
Yeah,
Where you're just like going through life and you're like, what is
It's like
the
okay,
point?
Might get cancer in a few years. I don't know.
Right. Yeah.
Well, so let's switch to then the optimism. So like the solar punk stuff we had talked about.
Yeah.
We talked about retroactive public goods, cosmopolitan localism. Like those are kind of in the more general optimism. So then what are some things that people can be optimistic about or reasons for that?
Right.
Let's go into that.
Well, the first thing is just like I think that it's probably important to do some soul searching. Like I think there's a psychological aspect of this. And Jem Bendel, he's like he's a scholar who wrote this piece called Deep Adaptation, and a lot of people who I guess he doesn't like the term doomer, but like are stuck in a psychological space of like depression, anxiety. I think you have to kind of go through that and then psychologically like find what it is that you're pulled toward that's like meaningful for you, that's like makes life worth living. And I think then it's a matter of like trying that thing and then honing it. So for me, it's a lot of different things. It's like I'm super into education. I'm super into my family. I'm into being a mother. I'm into the food system. I'm pretty interested in local economies or local manufacturing if possible, as a revival movement. Any of those things, any of the above. But honestly, I think like in general, my advice for people is just to like move toward the thing that you love. Find something to love and move toward.
Yeah.
And that can be multiple things. So I don't know, the optimism can be like so many different things, it's hard to even list out,
Yeah.
I don't know what your thoughts are
I'm
on
trying
that.
to think of like signs of it's hard to say because we only know what we're exposed to through online, and that's already a self-selecting process.
Right.
There does seem to be a general sense that things aren't quite right for again many different reasons, and so there does seem to be a general trend towards, and I think COVID really exacerbated this, where it's like, wow, like my whole social life has basically collapsed, and so what kind of activities can I get involved with that are just personally meaningful, that don't really have immediate economic value or really even social value, but it's just like, can I learn some kind of craft, right? Can I learn how to cook? I never did that before. There seems to be a yearning for community. That seems to be a big theme of just, so in terms of optimism, I think it's more at this point just like the desire among a lot of people to that, even people who aren't like tapped into kind of our ecological crisis, or climate crisis, but just in kind of believe that, capitalism, neoliberal capitalism is, globalized capitalism is great. They're still kind of saying, okay, but like I like all this stuff, but I need more meaning in my life. I need a sense of value, and so there's a lot of kind of neo movements towards building kind of these new types of communities.
Right. Or just like something, you're right, something meaningful, I think.
Yeah.
And I also think like the technology, it doesn't necessarily need to be Luddite.
Yeah.
The optimism.
Mm-hmm.
Like that seems to be our flavor in general, but
Yeah.
I don't think it necessarily needs to be. Like I think the whatever, the solar punk or whatever it is, I remain very agnostic toward anything that somebody else is experimenting with and finding meaning doing. Like I'm just like, this is great, go do it. Like I think in general we're kind of this culture of like poo-pooing other people's efforts and or like being competitive about like our vision is better, and especially with utopian visions, it's like, no, my vision is perfect and unassailable. And I think like part of the optimism for me at least is like to find something that's worth experimenting on, that you enjoy experimenting on.
Yeah.
Like we spend time walking around here, like it's actually really fun.
Yeah.
Like putting something in the ground. I mean, it's sad when your tree doesn't make it.
Yeah.
And you've tried really hard to make it, but it doesn't. But like, it's still really fun. Like the whole process is fun. And to me, like, it ought to be like we're building the next world. This is like the way that I see it. Like the world that we're in, it just cannot last for the way that it is. For very much longer, like just the way that it is. I don't know in what way.
So is that collapse or is that evolutionary transition?
Right, it's just like a transition. But I personally think like just the scale of things is so out of whack. There's no way that it can last. Like that we could ship things around the world like the way that we do, the supply chains, all the high energy stuff. Like there's just no way. So to me, it's just like building that sort of parallel world that we can exist in, that we want to exist in, and experimenting with that before it like gets so dire and all the skills we use in the previous worlds, become obsolete as that collapses.
Yeah, and so I mean, a couple of things. One is, you would hope that the forcing function, so to speak, is termed from Schmachtenberger, is not so strong. Like it makes you stronger. Like it makes you anti-fragile. It's in your hermetic zone where stressors make you stronger and allow you to adapt versus being all at once and so catastrophic that you just kind of wilt into a corner, right, and die. But the other thing, in terms of technology that I'm, hopeful for is the cosmolocal stuff, which is basically this idea that we can produce a lot of this stuff kind of in-house, but a lot of the design, a lot of the knowledge that you need to say, I don't know, create polymers from local materials, or whatever, or 3D printers, like the knowledge can be shared in kind of a global digital commons of knowledge transfer, but that doesn't require the actual movement so much of physical goods. It will probably require some, because there's just some, like, for technology, for example, you need certain metals that it's just hard to build from. It would be hard for me to build a computer sourcing from, but but in terms of some manufacturing, even so the project like Open Source Ecology, he's developing like this kind of civilizational toolkit of like 50 kind of core technologies that if you need to basically re-bootstrap civilization locally, you could, using local materials or recycled materials, perhaps you could. Right. And he shares all of his designs and everything online, and it's meant to be kind of adapted to the local context. And so that kind of stuff in technology, I don't know if it's actually going to pan out, but in terms of technologically what I'd be most hopeful for, it would be that, because that seems to get around that. It finds that kind of that happy middle of avoiding kind of the extraction complex of modernity, but still keeping some of the technological elements that we really love, like the ability to all of us meet on Twitter and and get together and share ideas and information and stuff like that. So that's something I'm hopeful for. I don't know. Again, I don't know if I think it's going to happen, but it's something that I'm rooting for.
Right.
Yeah.
So one of my favorite quotes from Buckminster Fuller was like, basically, you can't change a system from within it. You have to basically create a new system that then makes the other system obsolete.
Yeah.
So how much of the past stuff can we kind of like keep, or do we have to basically start fresh?
I mean, to me, like, I just think like so much of what we've thrown out from the past should not have been.
Yeah. Yeah.
A lot of that, yeah. I mean, it's and like indigenous can mean a lot of things. Indigenous can mean the people who have been in Appalachia for generations.
Yeah. How many generations do you have to be somewhere to be indigenous?
Right. Well, that's one question. But but also like knowledge that gets passed down through the generations. Like, I interviewed some people once who were talking about how like when the snow is off that mountain, that's when you can do the first planting, etc. Like that kind of information. Like, it's like, oh, we don't need that kind of backwards knowledge anymore.
Yeah.
Like, that's so backwards. We have our own way. Like, we know when the frost date is.
Yeah.
You know,
like
and
Farmer's Almanac will tell you.
Yeah, right,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah,
and
yeah.
so I think like just in general, there's a lot. I mean, I walk with my neighbors in Uruguay, and they're like pointing at plants that indicate something.
Yeah.
Like or are medicinal in some way that I wasn't aware of.
Yeah.
Like they're like, oh, that plant means you have high acidity. That plant means you have fertility. You know, you don't want that plant. That's bad. This one is, good for tea and stomach aches, whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like all of that stuff, it's not really as legible through like our way of knowing science and this kind of thing. So I personally think like there's a whole lot about traditional ways of knowing and interacting with landscapes that has been built over the course of generations that is like absolutely essential, that we should never have thrown out, that we should try to recapture to the extent possible. However, I don't want to like die of a broken foot.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I'm
Right.
cool. Like I'm cool with some. I think there needs to be a mix.
I don't have a toothache and think, okay, that's it for me.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
I mean, I also don't want my foot totally sawed off just because it breaks or whatever. I don't know. So I think that there's totally a mix. That doesn't mean we should throw everything out, but we're so far in the direction of like using every intervention and every science and technology that's ever been invented first.
Yeah.
As opposed to like as a tool in a toolkit.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I see. I don't see it so much as throwing out a lot of the physical things, ways that we've done things. I mean, I think we should definitely we could take a hard look at what is this kind of unnecessary technology. Is it just feeding this consumeristic beast, or is it actually fulfilling real human needs
Right.
and helping people to thrive? But I do think we do need like paradigm shifts, and that's Danella Meadows in her leverage points paper. She says that's like one of our highest priority leverage points is like at some point, thinking in terms of say linear systems instead of cyclical systems, or thinking that you're separate from nature and not a part and parcel of nature. There's just certain kind of paradigms, especially of I think modernity, that aren't going to take us where we need to go. But it's also hard to say, okay, we just need to have a paradigm shift, everybody will change their mind, and that's also naive as well, right? So it's more about like trying to be the example in your life of like, try and live according to a paradigm, and hopefully that inspires others to be like, what's going on with them? Like, it doesn't, the math doesn't add up, so let me try and understand their point of view.
And I would say like it's both individual and like what I'm trying to do in Uruguay is like both an individual journey and like I'm one person in a society journey.
Right.
I also would say a lot of times people think like we just need one top-down solution. Like let's just divest from fossil fuels or something like that.
Right. Or let's plant a billion trees.
Yeah, whatever it is. But it's like, okay, what do you do with all these people who need to learn the skills of for example, a low carbon life?
Yeah.
Or learn the skills of like being more in tune with nature or whatever. And so like that, the people's learning is also an iterative and incremental process. Like you can't really top-down engineer that.
Yeah.
You can't top-down engineer say like, okay, fossil fuels are too expensive now, good luck. Like you're going to have a bunch of people literally freezing to death.
I mean, you're going to have a famine. You're going to have
freezing to death. I mean,
it has to be a transition process.
Right. And I think a lot of people really kind of throw that part aside. They're like, governments, do something.
Right.
Whereas I think like the journey is both personal and social.
Yeah.
You know, and it has to be. There's really no way to like get there without. I mean, we have a solar water heater, and we have to like wait till the afternoon to shower. Usually in the winter, because that's the sun has been shining all day.
Yeah.
Like, imagine telling somebody that who's used to having hot water all the time. You know what I mean? It's just like.
What is kind of the thing that you guys would see? Pie in the sky. You know, you help into that transition, and then what is kind of like worst fears of this, like co-opted or whatever? You know what I mean?
Yeah. So I mean, I think Ashley, you're more of the ideas person. I think just very generally, you know, I see this as just being kind of some kind of connective node that just kind of connects a lot of different people from different backgrounds, different sensibilities, to find each other and to recognize the value in what each other are offering. And if so, we can be kind of like this, you know, this kind of connective tissue in, you know, whatever new cybernetic organism is arising next. That would be great. You know, in terms of actual initiatives, I'm going to pass that off to Ashley.
Yeah, so I mean, like my biggest picture goal would be something like making an alternative set of institutions. Yeah, I mean, basically making an alternative set, like maybe it's education, maybe it's communication, or all of the above, where like people know one another, they're helping each other out. People who are lost find something worth finding, find other people who they want to find, and I think like help each other along. I mean, maybe like to get very specific, it could be like a set of classes where people are learning actual skills from people who know those skills, and then build relationships, and then it just becomes this like, I have this phrase in my dissertation, like this shadow structure, it's like the shadow network of people who are like just building this alternative world.
Yeah.
And it could be like 100 alternative worlds. It could be like Bitcoin and cows world.
Yeah, it's not going to be one for sure.
No, and it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be. And it could be like
variety.
Yeah, Appalachia, small scale homesteading world, and then it could be, you know, what I mean, it could be homeschool education world. It could be, you know, whatever, self-sufficiency world, whatever it is.
Bucky world.
Yeah, I mean, the obvious, like the best possible iteration of this is you get as many people connected as possible, finding their path, finding their people,
and as many experiments, you know, as possible.
Exactly.
And that's kind of part of the localist ethos. Is
right.
It's honoring diversity, right? And the cosmopolitan localism part is like, let's have as many different experiments as possible, but then also let's connect up these experiments so that you can trade insights. Yeah, in terms of what could go wrong, I mean, any movement can be co-opted for whatever ends, you know, people want. And so, you know, you have no idea, you know, especially now online, you tweet out something, you might plant a seed in someone's mind that, you know, they're going to be the next Pol Pot or something, or, you know, whatever, the next Stalin, and that seed was a thing that, it wouldn't have come about without that seed in their mind in a completely new form. And you just don't know. Like, we don't know what harm, second order effects we might be creating. But you can't live seeking to be completely not doing anything because you're seeking to be completely harmless, right? And so it could, you know, any kind of authoritarian movement on the left or the right, you know, could co-opt some of the language, and I mean, all sorts of things could go wrong.
Right. Right. I mean, yeah, and just like, I think probably trying to the extent possible making oneself or this movement illegible to powers is good, better than not. I just think like trying to empower people to do things sort of off the grid, like literally and metaphorically, like, you know, just in ways that's sort of not known by whatever the powers that be. I worry about that a little bit. Like, I really do want to empower people to the extent possible, but not to put them in danger.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, some of the things, a lot of the people I interviewed who did small scale agriculture were doing things that were technically illegal. I mean, the number of animals they had or whatever.
Yeah.
It's just like, I mean, it's municipal law, so it's like not that big of a deal, but I don't know, like I worry about that because power is, you know, scary and has
Yeah.
there's a lot of violence. There's a lot of violence like potential
Yeah.
in collapse.
Yeah. Yeah.
That scares me a little bit.
Yeah, I mean that scares me a lot. I mentioned earlier about like my worry about this kind of scapegoating dynamic, where if your life is all of a sudden much more difficult, you look for somebody to blame. And I feel like oftentimes the dynamics I see, the incipient dynamics, is that oftentimes those scapegoats are really off target. Like they're not really related to the deeper structural problems. And I worry that, if things get more difficult in people's lives, just meet their basic needs, that it could, there could be a lot of violence. And so part of the reason of like trying to connect people is like having each other see each other's humanity beforehand.
Totally.
that might be really naive, but
no,
what
I don't
else are you
know.
gonna
I
do?
mean, I
Yeah.
don't even think it's that naive. Like it shows
Yeah.
up in every time I talk to people over and over again. I don't know. Maybe I am naive, and I'm seeking these people out. But like there are models to like work with other people and to find ways to mutually do something mutually beneficial.
Yeah.
And to me, like if Doomer Optimism is anything, it's that. It's like helping people to find mutually beneficial initiatives, finding ways
Right.
to work together, build community, build relationships, so that it's, honestly, to avoid that more violent
Yeah.
potentiality,
Right. And part of it, I mean, the scary thing with modernity and the prospect of some kind of collapse scenario is that like with modernity, we've kind of become disconnected from like how our basic needs met. Like it just becomes so abstract for so many of us, including myself, and I'm just trying to recover that now. But it's like if we don't see our neighbors as kind of essential co-participants in creating a culture and meeting our basic needs, then it's more likely we're going to see them as enemies, right? And so like how do you, and so part of, like you would hope that as things become more difficult, at the same time, there's a new arising of seeing our mutual interdependence and that we need each other. And how you make that bridge is to me is like a big question. And I don't know.
Just take the first step though.
Yeah.
Just take the first step, find a way. I mean, and also be okay with it being awkward.
Yeah.
You talk about this. I've talked about it too. Like there's no pristine way to go about this that's like
Right.
not awkward. I mean, we're all just so like disconnected from like the processes of making neighbors and like building
Yeah.
community and like doing
Yeah.
things ourselves that
Yeah.
it's awkward, it's embarrassing, but it's okay. You can still do it. Like we
Yeah.
give you permission to try.
Yeah.
I guess like to me it's just important to acknowledge that there are like barriers that people face.
Yeah.
And just we're basically just encouraging people to like use their agency, that any agency, any sort of movement for something positive that they can, like, but while also acknowledging that a lot of people are facing a lot of barriers. I think a lot of the pushback against the optimism part is like, there's so many barriers. It's so horrible. It's so like life is horrible, and I just want to acknowledge like that it is. It's really challenging for a lot of people, and I think I just want to make people feel like excited and empowered to like use their creativity, their ingenuity to think about where they could potentially have movement.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, however difficult your life is, and we're relatively privileged, but like, can you carve out like some kind of notion of agency in whatever set of constraints you have?
Right.
And yeah, it is going to be awkward. Like we're all familiar with, like the Neil Clarks of the world, and he called our podcast the Podcast, CASTE.
Yeah.
Right. And like it's never going to be are we on a gentrifying mission? I don't know. Like, are we, it's like this idea of like creating new communities, finding it's like, well, if you're from the perspective of somebody who's still a real localist,
Right.
in the real sense, and your family's been there for generations, it's like, this is just some new nonsense. But at the same time, so many people are uprooted in their lives. Like, so many people have lost connections to family, to their homeland, so to speak, that we have no choice but to rediscover place and connections in each other. And there's going to be lots of contradictions inherent in that, but there's just no other there's no other path.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's just like being forced into like a difficult choice, but I
Yeah.
honestly, like, I think, like we were saying, it's like violence is something that happens at the end of
Right.
empire, or it happens when there's resource limitations, et cetera, et cetera. So I think all we're advocating for is like to acknowledge that there are crashing cultures and incentive structures and resources and material constraints, and
Right.
despite all of that,
Yeah.
to try to make the best choices. I don't know, something comes to mind. My uncle's in AA, and he always says like his guiding principle is just to make the next best choice he can make.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I like that. It's
Yeah,
just
that's
like
good.
you're like, yeah, you're forced with this like this struggle with localism, and you could just be like, you know, screw those local people. Like, I've got my own mission, and I don't care if I'm gentrifier or whatever.
Yeah.
Or you could be like, I want to care about them
Like how can my
and
presence
myself.
how can my presence
Right.
improve, the lives of others?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So like you just make the next.
I
I
provide
would be
value?
encouraging
Yeah.
people to make the next right choice.
Yeah,
next
I mean,
best
at the end
choice
of the
they can
day, especially if we have scenarios of resource scarcity, it's either you find a way to work together or it's violence. Like that's just those are the two alternatives.
Right. So
so
we're advocating for like just try to do the
right.
better thing if you can.
Yeah,
that would
and
be
communicate and empathize, because
right.
you might not like each other, but violence is a backdrop that the only other way to avoid that is finding ways to support each other,
Right.
no matter how different we are.
Yeah.